Okay, now we're going to show a data export that didn't go as well. So I'm going to skip the first part. There normally aren't any problems during the peak and area measure section. So I'm going to skip that part. If there's any issue there, it's generally just because the computer is too taxed and you're trying to do too much. And so it will, if the program stops responding, but then you just restart it and it should be okay. Maybe you need to close some other browsers or whatever. So I'm going to jump to the where it becomes an issue is normally the step between peak and area measures and customizing peak output. You can sometimes run into a problem. So here's that problem. So I'm going to go to customize peak output. I'm going to pick the one that I make today, which is, I call it practice 2, just to make it easy. And I get an error message that looks like this. If you look at it actually closely, it can help to read the error messages to kind of understand what the problem is. So it says here that there's an inconsistent number of rows, and then there's this sort of so the number of rows is basically going to be equal to whatever this result should be, and so it thinks that there should be something like 14,836 rows or something like that, and it's just confused. The numbers don't make sense to it, and so it won't let you proceed further. But it actually has made files. And so if you go in and you look at and you look at where we were before in that practice and that export, it did make files there. And this one even has that little notepad icon next to it. So we can open it up and take a look. Now, this is what I was saying before about how peak and area measures on its own produces a file that has data in it, right? You can see all these values. Here, it's trying to tell you, here's the peak latency. It's trying to give you some numbers. And it's got ID numbers, it's got condition, but this is not obviously something that you can use in any stats program. There's too much other junk. And so what we need to do is to figure out where in here, what issue in here is accounting for an unequal number of rows. So remember, that's the error that we got, is that there's the number of rows don't make sense. And that's almost always what the error is. I think I've gotten some other ones before, but this is the one that commonly comes up. And so what we can do though, is we can take this stuff and we can copy it and put it into any number of different programs to try to help us figure out the row issue. So sometimes I like to start in Excel, sometimes I do Notepad++. But today we'll do Excel. So paste it in. Oh, that's not right. Copy that and paste it in. Then you can use the helpful data like text to columns function. It's a built-in function for data text to columns. And there's all kinds of different ways that you can tell it to split things up. So for instance, you see a lot of these arrow types of keys. I'm going to tell it, click other, and then put in one of these arrows. And you can see it's showing you what your data is going to look like. I can put in the other arrow with this. That one actually maybe looks a little bit better. And then it will separate them into columns. And you can just next. You can just hit finish. Now already this is going to be much more user-friendly. So often it's sufficient to just pull out a couple of the columns here and then put them into a stats program. So to get these to be just normally it's this column, the one with ID numbers, this column, the one with condition, and this one, the one with channels. And often enough, just the one with channels and this one is going to be enough. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove all of these text pieces of information. So I'm going to do Control H, which is the find and replace function, find all that, and replace it with blank. Now I've got just my ID numbers. Fantastic. Now I need to get rid of this extra channel text. You don't actually really have to do that because it's still going to be string information, but I just find it easier to read. Okay, and then let's get rid of SCID2. Okay, cool. Then I might open up SPSS and start to problem solve. And by the way, this is just kind of getting you started. It's not always going to work every time exactly right. And so, you know, the main thing I'm trying to show here is that the principles of how you have to try to approach these data and try to problem solve. But this isn't always going to work. I'm actually not entirely sure exactly what I'm going to find as I do this. That for now. Okay, so we want to copy all this stuff in. Okay, copy this in. Okay, and we'll just rename this really quick. We'll call it ID. And then we're going to get conditions, copy. It's probably more efficient ways to do this, but that's okay. Call it condition. And our last one, which is channel. Okay. Now there's a couple different things that you want to check. The first is that you want to do descriptive statistics. You want frequencies for this. So let's see if it will do that. All right, perfect. So now what it's showing you is it's showing you an ID number and it's showing you how many rows per ID number. Aha, so you want these to all be the same and they're clearly not. So if you notice, a bunch of the ones at the beginning are 156. I'm not actually sure why it's that long. And then the ones here are 184. And we've got some more 184s, and we've got some 156s, and then a lot of 184s. Okay, so what's going on here? So this is that issue that I was describing in the previous video where I was talking about how if you don't have an inconsistent number of channels across different participants, you're going to get an inconsistent number of rows. And there are probably ways that we could be solving this problem in EMSE directly. But this is sort of the way where the situation is now. So we want this. We can't obviously create data where there is none. Or we could always make it be blank, but that's going to be tricky to do. So instead, what we're going to want to do is go through and delete stuff until we get them all to be the same number. That's one option. The other option is to do two separate exports, and I like this option better. So in this option, what you want to do is you want to pick all of the participants that are 156, export them, and then take all of the participants that are 184 and export them. And then you're going to end up with two different Excel files, right? Because you're going to do these two exports separately. But if you do that, then you won't have this problem. If you really, 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 really had to, this would be the least time efficient thing to do. But if you really, really had to, you could, in theory, export using these dialogues here. You could do a peak and area measure and export each individual participant one at a time. We obviously don't want to do that. It's going to take a really, really long time. But if you're getting so stuck and you just can't seem to figure out, maybe you've narrowed it down to like 5 really tricky participants and you just can't figure it out, then just do those 5 people individually. And then you'll be able to get what you need. A couple other things here. So again, as long as this number 156 is the same, you could do those ones together. So 75, 103, 111, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those people could get exported together. But then you see somebody like someone like 500, so 471, 500, 505. Those people could be exported together, but not with 414, for example. Hope that makes sense. Now, this number isn't always going to be 156. So like the reason why it's 156 is because I've asked for different kinds of information that I might not always necessarily ask for. So if you ask for a different number of components, it might give you a different number of rows. So there's all kinds of things that could possibly happen that would make this number be different. But it turns out that was all that we needed to do. Now, if you wanted to do a deeper dive to try to understand this a little bit more, you could do a crosstabs. And that can be really helpful too, especially when you're really stuck. So you can do something like ID for rows and then channel for columns, okay? And then here you're going to get something really interesting. So you're going to get sort of like the number of rows that have, you know, this sort of information, and you're going to be looking for every single cell to have the same number. So for instance, if you look here, there are some that have zeros and some that have fours, and that's contributing to the number of unequal rows overall. If you think about this a little bit more, it'll start to make some sense. But what you can see here is that, like, so for instance, participants 75 through like 170 and 70 or so didn't have skin conductance data. That's ERG1, ERG2, because of an error that we had, which we lost a lot of that data. But then we figured it out, and so since then, obviously most people are going to have it. Then every once in a while, we still might make a mistake and skip skin conductance, or maybe the participant refuses it for whatever reason, and then you'll see zeros again. And so that's why those people can't be exported together. And again, you'll see that there's other places where this sort of emerges, right? I hope that helps to explain it. And it would actually be a really good idea, and I've started to try to do this, is to track in our Excel data tracking files. I've tried to start tracking which people are which in terms of who's got an expected number of rows or who's missing channels. And I'm trying to keep track of that in one of our Excels. I'll try to actually show where that is. Bear with me on that for just a second while I pull it up. So I don't want to show all of this on YouTube. So I'll just show this part right here. So you'll see I have there are different codes here suggesting, okay, there's something, not all of these people are the same. This one has a unique error sometimes. And so I've been trying to start to keep track of those to suggest that maybe certain bunches should not go together. So it looks like right now I have like 4 groups or so. I have those without a number at all. It's one group. I have people with 1s. I have people with 4s. And that's just to suggest those numbers are picked arbitrarily, just to suggest like, hey, these people might be work together as a group. So those 4s might go together, the 1s might go together, and then this minus 999 person is nothing that the participant did, of course. It's just something that is going on with the EMSE program. Anyways, all right, I've gone into greater detail than we possibly could need, and so we're going to go ahead and stop this video here. But now you see how there can be an issue, and the way to solve it is, like I said, identifying the ID numbers and then only doing sort of selective groupings of who you want to export in your peak and areas measures in that first step of getting the data out.